More and more is coming out about the corruption of US AID. To help me go through that, I have a former whistleblower, Mark Moyar. Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be with you again, Stephen.
So Dr. Mark Moyar is a professor, former US AID, author of Masters of Corruption, How the Federal Bureaucracy Sabotaged the Trump Administration. I know you have to take off here in a little bit to testify before a committee. I don't want to give away too much, but I want to say thank you for your time. You were a whistleblower. You brought up a lot of issues specifically about US AID. That has been one of the biggest stories over the last week. Help me and my audience understand, what was your role in the Trump administration, and what was the first things that you started to notice about US AID?
Yeah, so I joined the Trump administration as a political appointee at USAID in February of 2018, and a few months later was put in charge of what's called the Office of Civilian Military Cooperation, where USAID works together with the military, mainly in dangerous parts of the world. And I really didn't have an idea of the cesspool of corruption that I was getting into. I mean, I knew there was some corruption in government. I found myself in the midst of an office where corruption itself was taking place. And so I reported that, and that in itself is interesting because it involved abuse of federal contracting, which is a much bigger problem than people understand. You have people inside the government colluding with people outside the government to steer contracts to preferred people. But what's even more noticeable about it is that once I tried to do something about it, the whole system came after me, not the person who reported it. And so this gives you a good idea of how the process works, because it only takes this happening to a few people that everybody else realizes, I better just keep my mouth shut. And in fact, when I got there, that was kind of the mentality that if I see some corruption, I'm just going to look the other way. And so, whistleblowers before me had gotten punished. I didn't know the full history of that. Now, would I even been deterred? Probably not, because I think, we're there to drain the swamp. I didn't join the government to take part in corruption. But once I reported this, the bureaucracy helped protect the people who were actually engaged in the corruption. The most serious offender, they helped him get a job at the Department of Defense. So he's still in the government, because there was such overwhelming evidence against him, it was hard to keep him at the agency. But they looked out for him, but then they came after me. And this was multiple parts of the agency. They came after my security clearance. They seized my computer, and we found out much later they did this based on a so-called rumor that they heard something was on my computer, and they admitted they never found anything there. And part of what I learned too is that there are sort of bureaucratic godfathers who've been around a long time, and they have friends all over the place, and they've hired a lot of the people in the agency. And so those people are beholden to them because they got their jobs from them. And so those people, the security people, the lawyers, some of the other bureaucrats got me fired. And then I turned to the Office of Inspector General for help. And they turned out to be in league with these same people, and they conducted bogus investigations, quickly said the agency didn't do anything wrong. And even when I got a senator on my side, they were able to resist him. And so that's, partly why I think you're seeing what you're seeing now is people realize the whole system is rotten, and we've got to basically destroy what we have. And when we need things from the government, we can tear things down and build them from the bottom up.
Okay. I mean, now it makes sense why Elon Musk said that this isn't an apple with a worm. This is a ball of worms. Like that's how much corruption and collusion there is. When you say people at USAID were awarding contracts, is that based on the 1,290 lobbyists, or is this like family members and friends or people they golf with? Who are the relationships that they're rewarding?
Yeah, it's some of each. And one of the big problems we had in the first Trump administration is it was very difficult even for senior political appointees to get information. And they have these so-called panels that will review bids for these big contracts, but we didn't have visibility on those. So what you would have is, 5 or so, however many career bureaucrats sitting on this panel, they probably have a lot of friends who work at the companies that are going to bid on these contracts. So most of the money goes to either these mega contractors or NGOs or the UN. And what you see is people from US AID are constantly going over to those organizations and usually getting a big pay bump. So they go over there, then they have friends who are still at US AID who are on these panels, and they say, okay, well, I really know so-and-so over at this UN agency, and so I'm going to kind of help steer things that way. And then, next year, I'm going to go work at the agency too and get paid, much more than I'm getting now as well. And so you have this cycle of corruption that, I think we weren't able to break the first term. I think now we're finally getting there.
Okay. Yeah, I saw, I'm trying to remember the division. I think it was the Department of Energy, but there were several people that have admitted in the final 30 days of the Biden administration, they gave away almost $50 billion to green energy groups, hoping that 30 days later they would be hired for rewarding them with money while they still had access to the taxpayer-funded purse. Let me ask you this. You may or may not know this, but do you have any insight or information on whether President Trump and Elon Musk, were they guided to audit and investigate US AID first, or did they just happen to strike corruption gold by luck?
Well, I think there was awareness that it was one of the worst agencies. And you and I talked last year when the book first came out, and USA did not get in the news much last year, but it did attract attention within the world of Republican politics and President Trump, and I think it certainly helped raise awareness that this is one of the most corrupt places, and so it's a good place to start. And that was quickly validated when you go in. Within the first week, they put 60 people on leave for resisting White House directives, and then a couple of days later, they go to the Office of Security, which is led by the same guy who helped screw up my security clearance, and ask for documents, and he refuses. And so they put him on leave. But you clearly see that they were desperately trying to hide information. And now yesterday, they fired the Inspector General, who was another of these bad actors. And so now they're going to get access to his files. So this I think, will be a model that will be applied to other agencies and understanding what exactly has been going on. Okay.
I want to touch on the Inspector General. I believe there's 74 of them, roughly. They're supposed to be neutral, politically neutral, outside of the very organizations that they're overseeing. But over time, working hand in hand with these people, looking over the division, do they somewhat end up protecting the division that they're supposed to monitor and keep honest and keep efficient?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest problems we have, is that these inspectors general are attached to the agency, and they're supposed to be sort of independent of the agency, but in reality is they're not. They're in the same building, and they, to some extent, rely on each other. And so what you see is the inspector general, certainly at USAID, they viewed their main objective as getting along with the head of the agency. And that means covering up waste, fraud, and abuse, because if the agency is found guilty of waste, fraud, and abuse, it makes the agency leaders look bad. So they systematically, and this has been going on for a long time, in 2014, there was actually a case that came to light in the Washington Post where the inspector general had eliminated hundreds of references to derogatory information from reports about the agency. And then they went after the person who revealed that information to Congress. They fired her. And in my case, they tried everything possible to claim I wasn't a whistleblower and to try to show the agency didn't do anything wrong. So I think a new construct that I recommended is inspectors general should not be tied to these agencies. You don't want to have them in any way connected, so that you get rid of this, harmful nepotism you see, or cronyism.
Okay. Because I have to imagine, let's say I'm the inspector general over USDA or something, and every day I'm in, talking to managers and line workers and like these become your friends, and then you're supposed to hold them accountable. But then you're also covering your own back that what if somebody else comes in and discovers something that I miss? And like you say, I think, I don't even know if corruption's the right word, but I think the line of authority gets blurred as these people spend more and more time with the very people that they're in charge of monitoring. We've all seen the headlines: cyber attacks on our power grids, drones in the sky, violent attacks on everyday Americans. The ugly truth is no leader, no system can protect you from everything. And the last thing I want is to be standing in line depending on help that may never come. And when crisis hits, food is always the first casualty. Everyone needs it and panics when they can't get it. Now, that's why I've made sure my family is prepared with MyPatriotSupply. Their 4-week emergency food kit gives you the nutrition you need to stay strong in a crisis. With 2,000 calories per day and 100% of your daily value of 12 essential vitamins and minerals, this kit keeps you going when every meal matters. Right now, they're offering $50 off their 4-week food kit. Go to preparewithgardner.com now to grab yours. Don't put this off. Now is the time to prepare. That's preparewithgardner.com to get your 4-week food kit today.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. They get much too cozy. Now, the other thing I should mention is that the inspectors general are supposed to be responsible to Congress, but what we've seen, certainly in recent times, is that they will take the position that they only report to a congressional chairman. And this was critical for me because in 2021, the Senate flipped hands. So Senator Charles Grassley, who had become my advocate, was then no longer in a chairmanship. And so he went to Samantha Power, who's now at US AID, and said, give me more information about this Moyar's case. And she said, no, I'm not doing that. You're not a committee chair, so I don't have to tell you anything. And then we went to the Democratic committee chair, Senator Wyden, and got some lip service they were going to help, but we got no help. And then we've seen more recently, Senator Joni Ernst went to US AID to try to find out about dubious overhead charges, and they refused to cooperate. And she's just recently come out openly and shared that with Elon. But it's really, certainly under the Biden administration, you had an agency that was basically beyond congressional oversight.
Okay. I wonder if Senator Ron Wyden is unable to get much done for the American people because he's too busy using insider trading information to get over 100% return on his money. But that's a side story that we've been following. Did you ever see that where you were suspicious that some of these panel members that were handing out these large $10 $100 million, $1 billion contracts, that they would then maybe use that information to enrich themselves?
Well, I'm sure that happened. Again, I had very little visibility on those panels. I did have this employee who was using his government job and all the information you get from that to bring business to this company that he had a financial interest in. And unfortunately, a lot of that goes on too. And I even saw that when I worked in the Department of Defense, that you have people on the inside of the government who are taking information and surreptitiously sharing it with these contractors to help them get the job, get the contract.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I had a feeling that was probably going on. President Trump has been a whirlwind since he was inaugurated from almost the get-go. He's been heavily criticized for firing inspectors general, heads of agencies, and even the very lawyers at the Department of Justice that wielded lawfare against him and his family. But do you agree or disagree that this is part of the cleansing of DC, bringing in new minds, new ideas, people that aren't so entrenched in how it was done or political allegiance to something other than President Trump?
Yeah, I do think it's necessary. Again, this is something that was learned after the first administration. They did very little with inspectors general until 2020, and then they started firing them when they started to realize some of them were big problems. this time they come in, they removed 17 at the very beginning of the administration, which is, Ronald Reagan did that in 1981, and he didn't catch the kind of heat, nor do we hear these claims about a threat to democracy. But it does make sense to have Inspector General who is supporting the president, because what we've seen, and certainly we saw that before, that they will actually do things to try to undermine the president, or they will simply slow roll what he wants to do. So inspectors general have limited resources. In the first Trump term, President Trump talked about draining the swamp, but the inspector general was not spending time going after career bureaucrats. In fact, almost no cases that I know of in the first Trump term were brought against senior career bureaucrats. If they went after people, they would go after, say, a foreign contractor or a low-level non-union employee, but they weren't there to support what President Trump was doing. They were focusing on other things. So this way, I think certainly we're going to help fix that part of draining the swamp. And in these other positions, I mean, certainly you want to bring in leaders at other agencies who are going to be supportive of the president, and lawyers, because lawyers I've also found, certainly at USAID, where a big part of the problem, they have all sorts of ways to try to throw wrenches into the gears.
Okay. One of the big stories coming out of USAID in the last 72 hours was somebody there at the agency was able to make a $59 million payment to New York in order to house illegal immigrants. And people are questioning, how could that happen? That goes against an executive order from the sitting president. How does that happen? Is that something that maybe was already in the works, or something that somebody of their own volition said, I'm just going to go ahead and get that money out the door? How might something like that happen?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure on that particular case, but I will say this is a big problem we had when I was in the first Trump administration. You had bureaucrats trying to, they were very good just at hiding money and doing things without the political appointees ever knowing anything about it. And they also were trying to, oftentimes they would say, well, this money was approved during the previous administration, therefore we have no choice but to spend it. And I think a lot of times that was a spurious argument. And, as I understand, they've fired several people who were involved in this. And, I think they probably had already given read the riot act to these people, which should have been done the first time, but oftentimes wasn't. So, but this case, I think, will provide reinforcement to any bureaucrats out there who are going to try to engage in this chicanery, that it will be uncovered and it will be punished.
Okay. Mark, you've got a beautiful map behind you. It makes me wonder, did USAID, Agency of International Development, did that start off with pure intentions where they were like, okay, we need a pool of money that we can use to negotiate with Europe and China and Russia and England? And then did it just over time take on its own energy? How did it start, and how did we get to where we are now?
Yeah, well, it was formed in 1961, but it was built on the shoulders of the Marshall Plan, which Congress had authorized to help rebuild Europe after World War II. And the Marshall Plan was generally viewed as a big success. You had all these countries that had been wrecked by war. They needed money for reconstruction, and they got back on their feet. And so the idea was, okay, now we're going to take that model and we're going to go take it to Asia and Africa and Latin America and do the same thing. But it turned out that Asia and Latin America and Africa are not the same as Europe, and we've put in great sums of money. Now, there's some countries there who have gotten on their feet and are self-reliant, but many of them haven't. And so, originally the idea was, I think, we're not going to still be doing this, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, but we still are now. And so that's one of the problems you have. But it also over time has grown into a behemoth that we call the aid industrial complex. So you have these massive contractors who get money from USAID and NGOs, the UN. I mean, the agency's budget is $42 billion. And with that also you get a big lobbying group, and you have members in Congress who collaborate with them. And there are still some worthwhile things that the agency does, but it's been corrupted by greed and also by ideology. We saw in the Biden administration, there's been spectacular examples how they've spent all this money to promote DEI and transgenderism, and this is actually hurting us abroad because most countries don't care much for this ideology any more than most Americans do.
Okay. Let's stay on that topic for a second, because that's one thing that I kept seeing pop up with, like 500,000 here, 890,000 here, 2 million here. Would somebody in the Senate or the House of Representatives, would they make a bid for some of the US AID budget to go towards a trans magic show in Ecuador? Or would that have been somebody within USAID that maybe has LGBTQ tendencies or trans, wanting to spread the trans movement? How does something like that get approved? Because there's a lot of that trans stuff all around the world.
Yeah, I think in most, if not all cases, that is coming from the USAID leadership. Samantha Power was the head for most of the Biden administration. And, one of the problems we've had is that if you look at these cases that have been cited and you see numbers of, X number of DEI consultants, that's really only the tip of the iceberg, because what the policy was under Samantha Power, and it's like this if you look at a lot of other places in this country since 2021, not only are we do these specific DEI or trans projects, but we're going to infuse DEI and trans and radical feminism into everything we do. And so programs that on paper look like, we're doing an anti-malaria program, you look at it and say, okay, well, I guess, understand that. But then, they're not telling you that, behind this, they are, giving preferential treatment to trans people, or they are, forcing the staff there to undergo DEI training and sucking up time with that. So I think it's going to take a while till we get to the bottom of all of this nonsense.
Okay. I anticipate that we are just at the tip of the iceberg. We're going to see more come out of USAID. President Trump has already asked Elon Musk, expand your team, go into the Department of Education, go into the Pentagon, go into the military. Are you anticipating finding large amounts of corruption within each organization?
I'd certainly say you're going to find it Department of Defense. I've spent a good part of my career there. Now, there are a lot of great people there, especially in the uniformed military, but it also has this massive civilian bureaucracy that has a lot of the same problems you see at USAID. And especially in recent times, the Democrats have really focused on trying to infiltrate the defense bureaucracy, because that was the one area where they were not as prominent before. But, you've seen all of these crazy programs. There's been a lot of demoralization in the military because, they've been taken away from, what they're supposed to be doing to sit in meetings on white extremism or transgender rights and all this stuff. So we're going to see it there. I mean, there's a lot of other bad places: education, veterans affairs, and you see the same kind of things where they've, hired huge numbers of DEI consultants and forced people to go through all this training and critical race theory and all the rest. So I do think it's going to be something, I think almost, if not every bureaucracy in the federal government, we're going to see a lot of these same pathologies. Although, USAID certainly among the worst, but by no means unique.
Okay. Yeah, Elon Musk was saying last night in a press conference in the Oval Office with President Trump that he believes once they crack open Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, that's probably where they're going to find the largest amount of fraud. And I know a lot of people look forward to learning about that, because that is a program that tens of millions of Americans depend on. It's also one that has a ticking time bomb of, we're not bringing in enough money. And so if they can root out some of that corruption, that program maybe gets a fresh breath of air and they can revamp it. I know we're running up against a clock. You've got to take off. In our final minutes, tell me about your book, Masters of Corruption. What are we going to learn by reading that?
Yeah, we get to see the bureaucracy from the inside, which is actually very few accounts like this. So if you want to know what it is actually like inside one of these bureaucracies, and in this case, US AID, and a particularly corrupt one, and you can see just how the mentality that prevails. Again, I do make the point, not all the bureaucrats are bad. Some of them are good. Some of them helped us. But there's a lot of problems that stifle innovation and hard work. And you see how the system is rigged against ethical people and how it drives people out. And it shows, there are a lot of reforms that are needed, especially to help protect whistleblowers, because we have some whistleblower protections. But the book shows you how crafty lawyers and bureaucrats can find ways to get around those. So I hope it will encourage people to pay vigilant attention to the government. As I said, just in the last few weeks, we've really been able to get people's attention to this issue, which hasn't gotten enough attention in the past.
Okay, I know you're off to a committee. I don't want you to give away anything you can't, but is your experience being used to inform members of Congress to what's going on within these agencies?
Yes, it has. It's been, I got some interest last year and was, asked to serve in the new administration. I was not able to do so for personal reasons, but I've had a lot of conversations with people, and what's happened in the last few weeks is really, increased visibility, because a lot of people until a couple weeks ago didn't even know what US AID was, and now everybody's talking about it. So it is gratifying to have the ability to have some influence and help give people some good ideas as they're going forward to try to fix the very dire problems we have with our government.
Yeah, Mike Benz, who's been on Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan, he has said US AID it's actually a misnomer. They purposely made it look like US aid, so it would look like this benevolent, charitable giving arm of the United States government, when in reality it's used for favors and a lot of money laundering and different things like that. Professor Moyar, I know you got to go. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to put a direct link to your book so people can check that out, as well as your X account so that people can follow you online. Thank you very much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.